So DevOps is a term that you're going to use, that you're going to hear a lot in Agile, in cloud computing, and it's something that it is difficult to understand what DevOps is all about, and how that can help in today's organizations, because what we are used to is the old traditional way. There is some kind of a team that does development, there's a team that does support, day-to-day operations, the business usual, and so DevOps is different. So let's talk about what is DevOps and understand, or try to understand what is DevOps, and therefore you can explain that when you are a Scrum Master or a project manager and they're trying to articulate to you what is DevOps in that term, so you can correct that. So what is DevOps? So DevOps is ability to have developers, the team that does all that kind of work as a project team, and the operations team, which is a business usual operations, level 1, level 2, level 3, whatever the level, but they are the one responsible for day-to-day operations. They are kind of integrated into one team, so they collaborate together by automating any infrastructure to do with hardware, to do with workflows, to do with anything to do with application performance. There is no distinction between a development team or the project team versus the day-to-day operations team. They are one. So if they do development, then they are the one who's going to support that as well. If you make the bed, you're going to lay on it. So it is important that DevOps is understood that, as the name suggests, it's a development and operations. That's why it's called DevOps. So it's the ability of integrating these two teams into one. Now, you could say that the developers cannot be operation because they'll be stuck in a project and they will not be able to do new functions, new projects. The idea is that you're going to have the operations team able to do some development, able to fix defects, minor fixes. And there will always be some exceptions where it needs to have a more senior development team or developers. Yes, you can have that. But the idea is the operations team are able to do development. They're able to do that fixes, and they don't need to rely on developers to do that. So this is DevOps in a nutshell, and it's worth reading further into it to understand, because this is the most misunderstood acronym or area of cloud computing or Agile. So let's just talk about where we were and where we are trying to get to with DevOps. So the old ways, we have a developers working on the left hand side here in isolation. It's a project. It has a start date. It has an end date. And on the other side, we have operations who are responsible for day-to-day of the keeping the lights on and making sure all the consumers that are customer-facing applications are up and running. So they are the most important people to making sure that the applications are working and the customers are able to do what they're supposed to do, because that's what keeps the lights for the company and that's what makes the money for the company. That's how organizations exist. So this is a very critical role. But what happens is when you have a new project, it is working in isolation, and sometimes when they finish, it's almost like it gets flipped over the wall. And then suddenly the operation team are engaged in the latter part of the project. Sometimes they're not prepared, and therefore they will not be able to support it. So it has been like this: you develop and then you flip it over to the operations, and therefore you get a lot of contention. You get a lot of issues with that. So what are some of the issues, concerns that the traditional ways kind of possess? There is no collaboration. Like I said, development team are not really paying attention to making sure the operations manual, the technical guides, the support guides are up to date. They are continuously making sure that the code that they are developing is working, and making sure there are no defects, and they're fixing that. And so when the operations team get that application to support, they struggle. They don't know if they have the proper training. They don't know what are the guidelines, what are the documentation that they should have had, and they were not engaged, so they never asked for that to be updated. So there is that kind of disconnect between the developers and the operation staff, and therefore they struggle. So at the same time, when the application is critical, the developers team will be engaged by the operations team, because operations team don't know how to fix it, but there is a critical severity of issue. So the developers or the development team will be engaged, and they could be engaged for a long time. Having said that, the development team may be moved on to another project. And if they are moved to a different project and the first project has issues, you can see that they'll be engaged with that. So the impact would be that they will not be able to work on the new project, and they are still stuck supporting the old project. So they are further engaged. Therefore, the ripple effect is nothing gets done until what they have developed is working fine. So lack of collaboration between development and operations really creates the animosity, frustration. The team doesn't develop. There's a lot of anxiety. So it really doesn't help the organization, doesn't help the team, it doesn't help the individuals. So DevOps, as we said, joins the two teams together and makes them work as one team. So whatever they do, they know that they have to support that tomorrow. So it's in their best interest to make sure that if the error message is coming up, the error message is clear. If the developers just put a error message that says bad request, and then the operations people will get that and say, customer says, hey, I've got an error message when I log in, it says bad request. Could you please help me? So the operations would not be able to understand what that is. But in DevOps, they know that if it's not clear, then it will not be able to, they'll not be able to fix it. So the developers are developing with the message, the login was the username was incorrect, or the postal code was incorrect. So they'll be very clear in their message description as opposed to a bad request. So they are paying more attention. The developers are paying more attention to the proper messages in the error messages, proper warning messages, a lot of information when that happens, so that they know that the logging is capturing all that for them. So when they do get that message, the logging they have made sure that was kind of heavy logging will give them enough information to find out exactly where that the issue has come from. So at the end of the day, DevOps is the right thing to do. I have never had a DevOps set up in any environment in my experience. They've always understood that there's a DevOps team, but they've always had that development team moving on to different projects, operations team lagging behind, asking, what have you done? Have you done that? Have you done that? Truly, there needs to be a kind of a way of developer team. As part of the sprint planning, there has to be engagement of the operations. So you might have a SME from operations, whose job as a part of the Scrum team would be to make sure all the documentation, all the processes are clear. And when they do testing, error messages, they are clear, they know exactly what to do. And number two, those people who are a part of the Scrum team are kind of the trainer situation goes back to the rest of the operations team. And there is a constant development effort to making sure that the team is able to develop, look at the code, find the problem, fix the problem, and then deploy it to production. They do not need to have the development team engaged if that development team needs to work elsewhere. So it is in the interest of the organization to make sure that these two teams are married and they stay married. Otherwise, if there is a kind of divorce in the middle of it, you'll find that there's going back to the animosity, frustration, and therefore there will be a lot of anxiety. So it is important to understand what is DevOps. It is important to make sure that team effort and training, facilitation is enabled so that you get to this one team kind of working environment.